When we think of desert in England, we think of sand dunes and no life. Now, why are you wanting to preserve a desert?
Well, first of all, the Sonoran Desert is not, as you've seen with your own eyes, we went out together, it's not Saharan, and although there are some sand dunes in Yuma that have built up, we do have a few isolated areas. The Sonoran Desert is a desert because less than 10 inches of rainfall fall upon it, which is one of the measures. At times it looks very lush. It's one of the richest, no, it is the richest in fauna and flora, in the amounts and species, genetic diversity of its makeup. So it makes it a very singular ecosystem. And being singular to the earth and having no parallel anywhere among all the other deserts, and there are few, makes it incumbent upon those that love it to get out and fight for it, because they don't want to see it become one bloody great big golf course.
People might think that because you've gone through a public school education and you've ended up being rather bohemian, that there's some connection there. What do you think?
Well, I believe that being sent away to boarding school in itself, at the age of 8, I went away, is a sundering apart of normal family ties. And as traumatic as it is to an 8-year-old, I think what it does is imbue them with a sense of independence immediately. And although they're essentially cast out of the family, so that's what it boils down to, except for holidays, they become self-reliant. They learn to fend for themselves and go through what in my time was occasional brutalities within the system, and they get toughened up. And I understand that originally the idea was to do these schools were created to make the stuff that colonialists created out of, and that they were probably, many colonials spent years and years and years away from England, and this kind of upbringing gave them a good training to do that. And so I think that it sets the scene for different behavior, or the possibility, either that or very, very normal behavior. Either one toes the line fiercely and remains, not fiercely is not the right word, toes the line without question, or one moves to the other line and does become the eccentric and moves away from centros, the center. And obviously this is what's happened to me. Roughly speaking, English people, as I perceived it, are divided into two sorts. Those that stay put within England, abide by the societal rules, and those that go out and carve empires and colonize and adventure and do strange things, even to this day, adventurous things. And I suppose I fall into the latter category. I was not comfortable upon returning from a round trip. When I was 23, I took a backpack around the world, again seeking something I knew not what, and not having much self-awareness at that time. But the trip really was significant in the fact that it set me on a different course. When I returned to England at the age of 23, having seen other worlds, it really confirmed the fact that apparently, as indistinct as the realization was at that age, I had another destiny other than the one that had been chosen for me, i.e., how could I describe it, an average existence within a middle-class framework.
It may be looked at that you've opted out. Do you accept that you've opted out?
Well, obviously I'm not part of the mainstream anymore, but my definition would be opting in to something that is dear to my heart, and finding out. Perhaps the most difficult thing for anybody to find out in their lives is that which I really and truly, at gut level, at visceral level, want to be. And I've found it, by the grace of God. I've found my niche in the whole crazy ecosystem.
You tend to go back to England about once every 3 years. Is this some kind of fatalistic attraction?
No, it's extremely pragmatic. I still have, because I'm a prolific writer of letters, and probably this is the main reason, I've kept up good contact with old friends and made some new ones for the past, since I've been in this country, 26 years. I enjoy going back to England. I love the Yorkshire moors. I have a strong sense of attachment still to my native heath.
Do you still have the friends that you did when you were 20?
I have a surprising amount still. Some of them have fallen away. I can count at least 5 or at least half a dozen that I've known for all those years. One fellow has written to me faithfully for 30 years.
How do they view you, and how do you put up with them? They're living the lifestyle which you feel you couldn't lead.
But when I first left that way of life, I took the course that is understandable, and it usually comes from insecurity, as a matter of fact, for unsureness of the path that one's taken. That's rebelliousness. So for a long time, I did what is probably a very natural thing, if you look at it. I railed a little bit against my background and my upbringing. As my confidence grew in the way that I'd chosen over the years, so my understanding and appreciation for old friends who had remained in their way grew. And so now, at this age, I think I can safely say that I've become not only accepting but appreciative of the way that they choose to remain in. It is very curious that we still can get on so well. It's very curious and very gratifying that they put up with my oddity, or maybe they love me in spite of it. Bertrand Russell had a wonderful expression for this, and I'm not applying this to my friends but to society in general. He said that if you persist long enough in living the individualistic and the eccentric life, and you're not too unpleasant generally to people, you will eventually be given what is called a license to be a lunatic, and society will eventually give you that permission to continue in your odd little way and not only put up with you but accept you, which is an interesting way of putting it. And I always chuckle when I think of that, the license to be a lunatic. I would aspire to getting that license. There is a rock at the top of the road near the high road, which, as you know, is in fact a dirt road, but leads into town. And 2 of my good friends have been gently trained, bless them, to pick up the mail that I leave each night under this rock, wrapped in plastic, and they convey it as they go in on their way to town for me and drop it in the box. I pick up the mail myself when I go into town. I rarely have them do that. In order that they know that there is mail under the rock, the system is quite simple. If there are 2 sticks leaning up against the bush above the rock, there is mail to be collected. And if I have a message for them, a specific message other than the mail, I'll put 1 stick up. It's very crude, but an effective method. The letters that I write, a prodigious amount of letters, are over 200 pieces of correspondence, postcards and letters are being penned, and most of my nights, as now you know,
200 a week or
a month?
A month.
Over 200. Right. This is an overwhelming amount, but again, it's very much part of my being. And if I wasn't writing letters, and if I did have electricity, I'd be probably glued to the set. So it's a marvelous discipline for me to do this, and I think very fruitful.
Cabin is absolutely full of books. Have you read them all?
Good Lord, no, I wish. They pile up and up and up, and
Where do they come from?
Gifts, second-hand book sales, library offerings that have been put up for sale.
And do you read for enjoyment or enlightenment?
Both. The last books that I read that were truly entertaining were Conan Doyle's historical novels about Brigadier Gérard. I found that absolutely delightful. But generally I don't choose to entertain myself. I seem to be too busy in other ways to do that.
Right.
And I write far too much. I read far too little. And the vast amount of time is taking up writing, and I'd like to find a balance to bring it back in. I would really like to do more reading because I'm neglected it seriously. But to me, reading is a luxury, and it shouldn't be.
What victories or fruits of all your labours have you been able to see during the last 15 years?
Concrete. In a general sense, a great changing of the ambiance towards the desert. We have developers now talking like conservationists and creating what I call Disney moving a few plants are being moved around more, or trees are being dug up and boxed and moved around more, where 15 years ago they would have just gone under the blade. There is at least lip service now being given by the development community towards preservation. It's nothing like what I would like, and often ends up looking like sanitized Sonoran or Disney desert, as I call it. But it's a start, because it means that they're talking desert now instead of blading everything that they come across.
And it seems as though most of the issues that you concern yourself with are local rather than global. Do you get to the global ones ever?
Yes, I do. At least regional mainly, but national. I will write many letters to Congress on the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge issue, which they want to open up to oil. You know, I'm constantly sending off letters on things that in fact do extend beyond this region. And for example, I've discovered that President Richard von Weizsäcker of Germany, West Germany, wrote a marvelous letter or article to the Christian Science Monitor, my favorite newspaper, claiming that, you know, we have a responsibility towards stewardship of the land. And I promptly wrote a letter to him in Bonn and received a reply. So yes, I believe in what René Dubos, who is a conservation writer well known in the United States, said, that we should think globally and act locally, and I would like to aspire to that.
You said a long line of English or British eccentrics. Did you have any in particular in mind?
T.E. Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, right.
Sir Richard Burton. And these men, of course, were associated with the desert, so those popped to my mind first and foremost, since my own interest and love has found itself in the desert.
Could you just put in a nutshell what these two people did?
Sir Richard Burton was an inveterate Arab scholar and explorer who travelled in the wildest and most exotic parts in deepest Arabia at a time when the infidel was certainly not welcome. I believe, you'll have to look this up, I'm not good on dates, but it was 19th century explorer. His great contribution was finding The Perfumed Garden, which is an erotic Arabic novel, and translating it into English. When he died, his wife, horrific to relate, burnt all these translations, burnt all his works. Anyway, this was a man that can be considered eccentric. He dressed as Arabs and wandered in parts that were, yes, eccentric or just explorer, a bit of both. And these men popped to mind, as I say, because of their association with the desert.
What about John Muir?
Muir, a Scotsman, of course, so hardly English, but of Britain nonetheless. Muir I identify with very closely because of his passionate religious love of the natural world. Muir, though from a very strict Calvinistic upbringing, or was it Presbyterian, in fact, in later life became as close to a Druid as I know in the modern world. His love and belief in the natural world as therapy and as spiritual inspiration was second to none. And if I think of any eco-hero that lives, it is John Muir, more than Henry David Thoreau, with whom I'm also familiar and a great admirer of. Muir was out there in the wilderness, feeling it, experiencing it, and I like to do that too. Not as bravely as he did, but Muir brings tears to my eyes when I read of his life. I first encountered him late on in this country. I went to Yosemite Park. I heard a radio presentation of Muir, and the words that he spoke through the narrator had me weeping. I was so touched. And I knew that this man I had to know more about. Marvelous man, and without whom many of the redwood forests would have perished long ago. So yes, I associate with Muir. And he was called Crazy John of the Sierras. He was called Crazy John. He would tie himself to Douglas firs in storms to feel the sensation of being whipped backwards and forwards at the top of a tree. Now, if that isn't eccentric, I don't know what is. And yet I understand why he did it, clearly. To experience the elemental. And how often do we experience the elemental in life? The nearest experience, or the most hair-raising experience that I've had, and exhilarating at the same time, was just days before you came to this country yourself, and that was in Paria Canyon that feeds into the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, and my passage with 4 other Sierra clubbers through what they called the cesspool, in the deepest, narrowest, darkest slot canyon in the world called Buckskin Gulch, which is the upper part of Parar Canyon. This passage through this festering mass,
Right.
Muir chose to go to the top of a Douglas. We didn't have any choice but to press on through this mess and festering mass that they call the cesspool. There was no way out. We had to go
was
through
it mud?
It was mud, sticks, foul water, bad water, freezing cold, hypothermic, clogged, impassable, couldn't be floated, couldn't be swum.
How
Had
deep
to
was
be-
it?
Oh, chest deep.
Right.
It was a most extraordinary experience, but exhilarating on the achieving of it. The sense of passage, successful passage, and the unity that it brought to us was second to none. 5 strangers.
Yeah.
Muir would have probably loved that experience. I would lie if I said that I loved it, but I'm certainly happy to be able to relate it because it was very special, singular.
You go out into the desert on solitary treks several times a year, and at least once a year for 7 days, don't you?
Correct. I've done that for the last 10 years.
Is 7 days the maximum that you generally do?
It usually is the amount that one can carry. One is really restricted to the amount of food that one can carry. And yes, if I ate less, I could extend it for 2 weeks. I've heard of people going for 2 or even 3 weeks. I just choose to go for a week. And actually, the truth of the matter is, when the week is up, I wished I was staying for another 7 days. So perhaps I should extend this experience to 2 weeks in future. It's not enough. And yet it's more than most ever have. It's total solitude, unrestricted, and I do believe that most human beings go from the cradle to grave without ever knowing 24 hours of complete solitude, let alone 7.
And how did you discover this new experience of spending extended periods without seeing another human being?
The first experience came to me through a desire to be a troglodyte. I just had this whim. A whim came to me. Wouldn't it be fun to live in a cave for a few days? And that's how it started. And the cave idea, I found my cave. I spent the time. It wasn't as romantic as I thought. There are a lot of bugs in caves, and it's very hot, and it doesn't have the romance that one would think, being a troglodyte. This then took off from the cave idea to just being alone. And it actually served my purposes well, because other than a spiritual pilgrimage, if you wish, or a pilgrimage, it's allowed me to write journals about the experience. I think I have 7 out of 10 years I wrote journals. And these journals, of course, I've been able to read publicly, and I've used as a vehicle for my desert preservation campaigns.
Now, how have you managed to support your existence beyond the fringe, as it were, without having an ordinary job?
Well, that's been a challenge, and Henry David Thoreau in Walden, which I recommend everybody to read, agonized over the same situation. How does one, in fact, live outside the pale, beyond the pale, in one's own time and pace, and keep out of debt? Well, the answer, as Thoreau knew 150-odd years ago, was to live simply, to reduce one's needs and wants. And by reducing them to a minimum amount, this in turn allows one to, or at least gives one the luxury of not having to work conventionally as much, i.e. one doesn't have to go out and pay the payments on a car or work for the money to pay those payments if one doesn't have a car. One walks more and takes the odd ride now and again. So the idea being then to reduce the living requirements, to bring the sum of money required to live down to a bare minimum, bare bones, which doesn't bother me in the least because I'm not interested in living luxuriously. I never have been. So this allows me to live for $150 or $200 a month, which amount I can then make readily by giving literary and environmental journal readings. In other words, what Thoreau agonized over and what I puzzled about for a long time is finally come true as a dream. I found something that I love to do and that pays me a very modest amount of money. I'm actually below the poverty line that Ronald Reagan describes for people that they have an indicator factor. I'm well below poverty line, but I consider myself very rich in other ways.
Is there anything here that you miss? Or have you got everything you want?
I have everything I want. I can say that in all sincerity.
You've consciously dedicated this life of yours, this lifestyle, to the cause of saving the embattled environment. How did that come about?
This began, the seed of this dedication began 14 years ago. I was coming out of a period of deep self-evaluation and not a little confusion, not quite knowing where my life was going, those critical years in the mid-30s that Carl Jung talks about. And I had, quite simply, I was walking from a guest cottage that I had in Paradise Valley, which is a desert community outside Phoenix, north of Scottsdale. And I happened to notice that the sides of the road were very filthy with cans and bottles and other litter, which is not unusual anywhere in this world anymore. But having noticed that, this was not unusual, but for some reason or other, when I saw it, particularly in this area that was quite an affluent area, I was struck by it. It was almost like an epiphany. Suddenly, the unfairness of a littered area, to my mind, the paradise had gone out of Paradise Valley because it was ringed with garbage and trash. So I actually returned to my apartment or my guest house and started furiously penning a long, long letter to the mayor of the town and everybody I could possibly think of, copies to Barry Goldwater, and he lives locally. In fact, he lived within the town of Paradise Valley. He ran for president in 1964 and was beaten. And so the problem had been there for a long time, but that day I became impassioned about something and hadn't been for a long time prior to that. And it seemed that I had been given something to get my teeth into. And that was the very beginning. This campaign merely started as a litter pickup, organized the whole community to pick up trash, and then it turned into a lobbying effort in the state Senate because there was a deposit legislation bill being put through, what they call the bottle bill in this country, which is putting 5 cents return deposit on beverage containers, cans and bottles, which we used to have in Britain when I was growing up as a boy, and which we should all go back to, as far as I'm concerned. And so this took me from a mere local pickup into a political lobbyist role, all of a sudden, within months, which I'd never dreamed would happen. And from that point onwards, my life seemed to turn. It was as if I were given or had found a cause that was close to my heart. As a boy, I was close to the natural world and used to spend many, many hours, days, wandering alone in the woods, Bramhope, where I grew up, and it seems like I had found a regeneration of this love later in life, much later, and put it to what I hope has been a powerful use.
And what was the occasion on which you tipped out the cans on the floor?
That was the culmination of the first campaign of which I have just spoken. We had pleaded with the state legislatures to come out and view the problem for themselves. We being the group that had gathered to try and get this bottle bill introduced into the legislature. We pleaded with them to come out, the committees, the Natural Resources Committee, to see the problem so that we could identify it. They showed no interest in doing so. So we took what was considered rather a sensational tactic of going out, picking up 2 cans of bottles and cans, and we had a friendly, slightly radical senator, Madeleine Van Arsdale, who allowed us to sneak these bottles, these bags, large bags of rubbish, into the legislature through a back way, and she allowed us to secrete them in her office. And at a critical time when I was testifying to a committee about the bottle bill, 2 cohorts rushed in at a given moment and upended the sacks on the committee room floor, which caused a lot of outrage in certain areas. One lady from Tucson, a more liberal senator, looked at it and said, she took one look and said, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." So it wasn't all received badly. It achieved the necessary publicity because it was portrayed on the front page of the Phoenix Gazette the following day, and really that's what we were about. We were facing a powerful, well-heeled beverage industry lobby that had lots of money to fight us. We had no money, so we had to use these tactics. I think the point was made. Since the mountain wouldn't come to Muhammad had to go to the mountain. Or is it the other way around?
Which issues are on the boil for you at the moment in terms of the efforts you're putting in?
The principal thrust at the moment is to attempt to stop or mitigate the damage done by the juggernaut, which is development that is rolling northwards from the city of Phoenix into lush Sonoran desert.
How much has Phoenix grown?
Vastly. In the last 10 years it's tripled its population. 10 years ago the air over Phoenix was considered the cleanest in the country. Now it ranks among the filthiest. And the stress factor of life in Phoenix is the 13th in the country. It's abominable. However, the development is moving so far north into what is extremely classic Sonoran desert, and you've seen it. The saguaro, giant cactus, and the Palo Verde communities that are really singular on the face of the earth. There's nothing like it in the world. And this is going under the bulldozer and being replaced by endless golf courses which consume vast amounts of water, that destroy the natural habitat. So essentially our Sonoran desert is being greened over and reconstituted in a way that I find appalling, and I'm not alone in feeling that way.
What other avenues of campaigning are open to you?
Well, in this country one has the First Amendment, the right to free speech, which is a lovely piece of constitutional freedom that in fact allows picketing. That's also allowed in England. But picketing golf courses, the Desert Mountain, which is a development that has just opened up in land between here and Carefree, has introduced 3 full-sized Jack Nicklaus designed golf courses into an 8,000-acre development. Has consumed about 1,000 acres of natural habitat, vast amounts of water, from groundwater nonetheless, some of it fossil water that's been there for 10,000 years. And on the day that the first golf course opened, I chose that day, when Nicholas was coming to open it, to stand at the entrance and protest with a sign that said, "Golf is killing this desert." 2,000 people came that day, and they couldn't help but see this sign.
Did Jack Nicklaus see it?
Yes, I believe he did, because one of the photos that was taken by the local paper featured myself standing out there in a long black low limousine that was darkened, but one can only assume that such fancy vehicular conveyance would be given to Nicholas and nobody else.
Now, you're 50 and you're not married and have no children. What's going on there?
Correct. I think I'm too much of a solitary soul to incorporate the idea of marriage and children. My life seems to be consumed so much with the work that I do that I'd probably make somebody thoroughly miserable if I had to live with them.
Have you ever been married?
No, I've never been married, no. Actually, I've never been married in the conventional sense of the word. I have gone through several live-in arrangements that, as far as I was concerned, was as good as being married. So I have been through that. I enjoy women a lot. I have been, in the past, a bit of a philanderer. I'm no longer that. I'm more monastic now, gone to the wild swings from one to the other. I think that my energies of that area are concentrated in, should we say, during the dry spells, for want of better, are concentrated in work. Bernice once introduced me before a reading. Bernice, my friend you met, Falling Leaves, got up and said, "Geoffrey's about to read. If you haven't heard Geoffrey, you're going to enjoy it, blah, blah, blah. And ladies, don't hold up any hopes here, because he's already," how did she put it? It's funny, it popped right down. He's already got a love affair going with nature.
You've referred to the human race as Homo sapiens. Have you really given up on the human race?
Collectively, yes. Selectively, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. I wish I could say otherwise, but what I see happening by Homo sapiens, rapiens, demens, tyrannicus, you take the genus, is the consumption, an overwhelming desolation of the natural world. And I suppose there's a part of me that fights for the underdog. The underdog is not really man. It's the fauna and flora, the other passengers on this planet, on this spaceship that we're on. So my sympathies tend to veer strongly towards the natural world because they're voiceless. The earth has no voice to defend itself. Even the poorest human being can wail or can shout in terror. I'm not steeled against feeling towards human beings, but collectively, what 5 billion human beings are doing to this planet is appalling. and I don't like the anthropocentric attitude towards the Earth. I don't buy that. I think yes, we've been given an intellect. Yes, we're bright and smart, but sometimes we're too smart for our own good. And what we're doing is bringing this planet to its knees, and it's not right. We have to learn to consume less, we have to learn to express reverence for life, and we have to heighten our sense of ethics towards the other members of this planet.
Now, you actually don't believe this planet's going to survive, do you? Or at least the human race?
Alas, no, I don't.
So, how come you're fighting so vivaciously?
I don't seem to have any choice. I'm driven to take a stand, not only because I believe that one has to go out fighting, but also, and I'll be frank, it is my raison d'etre. There is an underlying, I hope, enlightened selfishness to this. My raison d'etre is the defense of the natural world, and to be given a sense of meaning is one of the greatest gifts that exist. And to be secure in it and strong in it is something that requires all the effort that I have, right down to the last giant saguaro. I have no choice but to go on fighting.
I mean, what would you say to somebody who was experiencing a lack of soul in his life?
I would say go out and commune in the nearest natural environment you can find. Easier said than done if one hasn't had any upbringing in that. The wilderness can be a very threatening area, but in fact no less than the hell of some cities.
Do you subscribe to a religion, or is this very much a pagan existence of yours here?
Oh, I wouldn't say it's pagan at all. I have an abiding belief in a great spirit, a larger force. If I shrink from the word God, it's only because I would rather it be kept more cosmic, more open to definition. Certainly there's the druid in me, but I don't go out and worship trees.
But you do hug them?
Yes, absolutely, with great, and lizard kissers and tree huggers. I'd kiss a lizard if I could get close enough to it. William Blake said, marvelous saying, "The tree that moves some to tears of joy is to others just a green thing that stands in the way," and by God, that's true.
You are fairly well known. I mean, are you an oddity to them?
It's very hard to know, or would some power the gift he give us to see ourselves as others see us? It's hard to know, but I am led to believe. I had an interview once with an Arizona highway reporter, and he said to me, most people speak quite well of you. They do think you're different, but generally speaking, they seem to hold you in some esteem. That was nice to know. If he'd said to me, a lot of people think you're crazy, I would have said, I imagine they do. So it was. I believe there's an underlying. I would hope. Who knows? Who knows what people think of us? But I would hope there's an underlying appreciation.
Have you made any enemies there?
Among the development community, yes.
Really?
Because I fly in the face of everything that they want, and I have attacked golf courses. I have attacked developers in no uncertain terms, and of course, they'd be delighted if I fell off the nearest canyon. Absolutely overjoyed to hear that.
But they haven't sent anyone to push you yet?
I haven't seen any. I think I have the advantage out here. I'm the Apache out here, and they're the townies. And if they came out, they'd probably find a rock behind their head before they knew it. If they meant any ill will.